everyone. Welcome to this online debate, Strengthening State Capacity, Connectivity to Boost Growth, which is taking place as part of Friends of Europe's Africa-Europe Days. This is a series of activities we're running from until the 9th of December, focusing on accelerating the impact and reach of the Africa-Europe partnership across key areas: energy, agriculture, digital health, and transport. I'm Amanda Rohde. I'm Senior Program Manager here at Friends of Europe, and I'm here to guide you through today's discussion. First, a quick reminder of the rules of the game. To those of you joining via Zoom, please do turn your videos on and keep your microphones muted throughout the conversation until we call on you to come in. If you would like to ask a question, please do raise your virtual hand by selecting the button on the Zoom screen, asking a question, providing feedback or reflections, all okay. We also encourage you to make use of the comments section to exchange information and share further reflections. Finally, to those of you joining via live stream this morning, we encourage you to get involved in the debate by tweeting. You can use the hashtag #FOEdebate or hashtag Africa Europe Foundation. Today, we're talking about connectivity. COVID-19 has shown us that we must have resilient systems from healthcare to welfare. But in order to have those systems, we have to have a certain level of state capacity. This means that countries must be capable of protecting their citizens, both in times of crisis and helping them thrive in times of plenty. This also means having in place targeted initiatives to create positive externalities, such as connectivity and infrastructure projects. Better transport links, especially in rural areas, have, among many other economic aspects, positive impacts on gender equality, on the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, improve access to education, and empower the youth. Though the pandemic has interrupted many of the infrastructure projects that have been in place, today we're having a conversation about how to reassess and target specific sustainable initiatives that can create wider net positives and help us move towards achieving Agenda 2030. So this is, in a nutshell, what we're diving into today. We're joined by 4 experts who are going to get us started on the conversation. We've got John Makoa, who is the Regional Director for Uganda at the AVSI Foundation. We've got Fadimatu Nuchemosimo, founder of the Young African Aviation Professional Association. Tommaso Spanavello, Public Affairs Manager at UNIFE, which is the Association of the European Rail Manufacturing Industry. And finally, last but not least, Armin Wagner, Senior Transport Policy Advisor at the German Development Agency, GIZ. So I'm going to start in with John this morning. John, let's start with education. How does increased connectivity open up more educational opportunities, especially when we're looking at rural areas?
Thank you. My name is John, as is mentioned there. First of all, I will start by saying connectivity affects all aspects of our lives, but most important, education for various reasons. But I first of all want to say that the state of our connectivity, especially the road transport, which is a very important factor within, for example, Uganda, is weak. The maintenance of those roads is still bad. There is a lot of inaccessibility. Some of it is linked to weather. In some places during the rain season, you cannot access some of these places because of rains. The road change their state as soon as it starts to rain. And then we still have a high percentage of people that live in the rural areas. However, the rural areas is still the place that connects the food system. Most of the crops are grown in the rural areas and they have to be transported to towns. And they feed the urban centers. And this also became much more clear during the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, because many people had to struggle to get food because of the poor infrastructure that we have. And how does this affect our education systems here? First of all, many of these places have to receive the materials. For example, during the COVID pandemic, the government rolled out a system to transport and to distribute educational materials. And we realized that the schools within the urban centers benefited more than the schools in the rural areas. Why? Because there was no proper connectivity to these areas. And most of our education as children in families depends on our mothers. The mothers anchor our homes, our families. And what does that mean? It means that if they are not able to make an income, it impacts on the education of their children. But there are also studies out there that show that the level of education of a mother is important for the upbringing of their children. And these mothers derive most of their income from agriculture, which is linked to the transport connectivity. So a poor infrastructure in transport affects them directly. It impacts on education of their children because they cannot get an income that supports their children. For many teachers out there, they do not want to work in the rural areas. Why? Because those rural areas are not equally supplied with materials, with the supplies in schools like the urban centers. And therefore, they avoid to work in those rural areas. And once they do that, it means that the quality of education that in these areas is also hampered. You cannot have qualified teachers allowing themselves to work in these rural areas. And one of the other reasons why the qualified teachers don't want to work there, because they care for the education of their children. They want to be in a place where the education of their children is reassured. And that is mainly always in the urban centers because they have a better connectivity in the urban centers. And on the other hand, when I think about some of the ways in which we can try to ensure that we have some of these solutions, because we've had a number of programs that are supporting infrastructure development in Africa, and many of them fall short, even with the best intentions and even with a lot of funding that comes into it. What we realized when we carried out a project of infrastructure development in the rural areas, we noted that many of the things are carried out by external actors, and there is very little involvement or participation of the local actors. And this tends to put them out of the system, tends to put them out of the income that is circulated, the economy that is circulated around the development of this infrastructure. And once they are not benefiting from this, it means also that their children will not benefit. It means that the schools will not benefit. It means that their income is low. It means that they will remain tied within the poverty levels that do not allow them to access quality education, do not allow them to access the same level of education that their counterparts in the urban areas do. I want to stop there for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. John, at the beginning of your intervention just now, you were talking a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on all of this, which is on everybody's minds. It's been on everybody's minds for, feels like forever now. So how specifically has connectivity been impacted, or how does it affect health access to rural areas? What's the situation here?
Say that again. Did you say health access?
Yes, exactly. I'm so sorry. I'm mixing up words. No, how is connectivity impacting upon getting health services to rural areas? How does connectivity affect health in general?
I think health probably has been the biggest victim of connectivity during the COVID pandemic. In Uganda, long before we had a single COVID death, single direct COVID death, we already had death out of mothers not being able to reach to the health centers, mothers giving birth on the roadside because they could not be able to connect to where the services are. And a number of these was because the infrastructure is poor at the moment. And this infrastructure impacts especially on women. I insist this because for some reason, the men are able to travel on trucks. They will travel anytime in the night. They will be able to take the easiest means that is there available to them. The mother has to think twice. Should I leave my family before I go? Is this a safe means of transport for me to go? How long will I spend on this road? And therefore, they are impacted much more than any other member of the community.
Thank you, John. I'm really glad we're bringing up the gender dimension so early in the conversation, because this is something that we will need to continue to have in mind, and maybe we come back to a little bit later on as well. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Fadimatou. Fadimatou, I'd like to move now more specifically to the urban-rural connection, especially in light of COVID-19 and increasing urban-rural traffic. How has this emphasized the need for improved connectivity between urban and rural areas? I think we've heard a bit about this from John already, but I think we could go into more detail here. Oh, Fadi, I'm sorry, you need to unmute your microphone. Thank you so much.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm Fadi, the founder of the Young African Aviation Professional Association. And our purpose has been for the past 6 years to raise awareness in rural areas, because our focus has been on letting the youth in the rural area understand the importance of connectivity through aviation. And thanks to COVID, although the whole world sees that aviation has been impacted, we see a lot of concentration of mobility within the rural and urban areas in countries. So the impact of COVID has been a good indication for governments, especially in Africa, that have had a strategy to develop aviation to review the tendency on orientation for infrastructure development. We see more and more people due to COVID who lost their jobs in the urban areas, moving back to the rural areas to engage in new ventures like agriculture, transformation. It's just amazing the projects that are going back into the rural areas to produce goods that have to come to the urban areas. So there's been a focus and review with most of the countries on the importance of cargo aviation, because each time we've mentioned aviation, people just see the passengers from one country to the other. But now, taking into consideration the fact that the road infrastructure for mobility has challenges between most of the cities and the urban areas, we are now raising awareness on the great importance to also think about reviewing the policies on encouraging the transportation through air of goods from these rural areas to the urban areas. And this also goes into the strategy of creating jobs facilities for the future, for the young Africans to see the opportunities around their areas. There's also been a huge relaunch of activities with regards to tourism. And we see that this year, the celebration of the International Tourism Day was all about development and in rural areas. So people are more encouraged to go back into the rural regions to discover what they have, the culture, the habits, the food that the people have. And apart from improving this mobility of road infrastructure, which has been a challenge for the past years, we are also seeing how aviation could see a rebirth through orientation of people, seeing the possibilities of having small aircrafts flying into these rural areas, or why not invest in building bigger airports that could use the resources in the rural areas to increase growth. So this has been at the core of the activities of all the stakeholders of aviation in Africa since the beginning of this pandemic. And we know that the impact has been huge, but we go into, say, following the Vision 2063 of the African Union, we definitely need to see the opportunities of facilitating the mobility within the urban and rural areas, bring in more of the development through technology in the rural areas, and get everyone involved. So basically, that's what has been going in the actions that we've been undertaking.
Thank you, Fadi. I mean, you've gone a bit into already kind of opportunities for boosting the aviation sector. Maybe we could look a little bit more at how we can boost in order to recover from the pandemic, and then how greater Africa-Europe cooperation might play a role in achieving this.
Okay. Before the pandemic, we are all aware of the fact that Africa is the big niche for the development of most of the infrastructures with regards to transportation, by road, by sea, by air, to facilitate movement of goods and people. So Europe being very developed with this technology, and John talking about education, we still focus on the intensive cooperation and collaboration with regards to educating the next generation of Africans into getting the technology and the know-how that is already developed in Europe to facilitate all.
Oh, you've cut out for just a second. Let's see if we get you back. I'm not sure. Okay, Fadi, unless you come back in right away, I think we'll just move to our next speaker, and we'll come back to you as soon as you're back in so that you can finish up your points on this. Inviting in now Tommaso. Tommaso, thank you for being with us. I want to talk a little bit about mobility justice today. How can better transport infrastructures help to improve mobility justice?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I will be speaking from the perspective of rail, and I will also touch perhaps some of the points that John and Fadi have also brought to our attention. So indeed, I'm representing the Association of the European Rail Supply Industry, and for us, we see mobility as much about developing transport infrastructure and services as it is about enhancing mobility justice by removing all the social, economic, and physical barriers to movement. My perspective is more from the passenger's point of view, of course, but I would like to highlight that the rail dimension is also very important. One of the greatest assets that we see of rail and urban rail is their ability to play a decisive role in development policies, urban development policies, improve the image of a district, of an area, of a region, of a city, a center and a periphery, contributing as well to their social and economic regeneration. To build a new railway line, to build an extension of a railway line, to build a metro line, a tram line, can help restructure the areas by creating physical links between different cities, between the centers and the periphery. And in this sense, rail and urban rail projects can be the essential facilitators to give or improve the accessibility for people to workplace, to facilities, to leisure facilities, but also, John mentioned the importance of education, also to improve the accessibility to universities and to school. Also, these rail projects give the opportunity also to authorities. If we talk about urban rail projects, for instance, cities authorities, through a new metro lines project, through a new tram line project, can also take the chance to redesign the area which is interested by this project. And this could contribute not only to economic boost to the area, but also can improve the perception that inhabitants have about the place they are living in. And the same goes for people that live in very isolated and rural areas. By giving them a connectivity to these schools, workplaces, and facilities, they could also improve then their perception about the place they live in. It is, paradoxically speaking, the immovability of rail infrastructure that is one of the most significant enablers of this social and economic potential that rail infrastructure projects have. This immovability gives a sense of permanence, as these systems cannot be removed from one day and the other. The physical permanence of rails under or above ground really is a visible, tangible, concrete way to show that an area is being invested for the future. And it gives also, of course, like long-term certainty to any potential investors. Fadi talks about the importance of aviation, and I mean, I'm coming from the rail perspective, so this could see as a sort of conflict between the two, but it's actually, I see this as perfectly complementary, like in Europe, but also in Africa, of course. I mean, of course, like nobody lives like with an airport next to their door, so they need to get to the airport. And in this sense, having some sort of synergy built between airport infrastructure and rail infrastructure can be beneficial for the two modes of transport and also for the citizens, for people that need to get to airports, of course, through a railway line.
Thanks, Tommaso.
I don't know.
Sorry.
Yes.
No, I was I think I'll come back to you with a quick follow-up.
I wanted to say something about urbanization, but I don't know if you have the time about that.
I actually have a quick question for you about urbanization, and I see that Fadi is back, so we'll bring her back in after we finish up with you. And I know we've got a few questions starting to come up. I think we'll finish up with all the speakers before we open to questions, but please do feel free to start getting your names on the list. Tommaso, before we move on, I just wondered, in terms of urbanization, we were talking a bit about redesign and new projects. How can taking a new smart green approach to transport reduce the negative impacts of urbanization?
Well, urbanization is one of the greatest challenges, one of the biggest mega trends. It is a challenge in Europe, of course, where there is also the issue of aging population, but in Africa, where the population is growing exponentially, this is like a particular challenge. Of course, I think that when it comes to urban rail, for instance, urban rail offers a paradigm of sustainability, of course, like cleaner air, higher capacity, a higher number of people which can be transported using less space, and also this part of the land use, like land becomes scarce and precious, and urban rail infrastructure offer the opportunity to do like a more effective land management when it comes to tackle the challenges of urbanization.
Great, thank you very much. Fadi, I'll come back to you so you can finish up your remarks before we move on to Amin. I think you were talking about the role of education and tech, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I was talking, sorry again, this is one of our realities.
No problem, this is the world.
Yeah, technology went off.
Yeah.
So I was talking about the importance of how the African-Europe cooperation will improve on education and facilitate mobility. And I was saying that education plays a key role. As John mentioned, we need to get people more aware about the opportunities that are related to the different sectors or the careers that are involved in the development of all these infrastructures and even the services around the facilitation of mobility. So COVID has showed everyone that cargo has been a key role in transporting goods from one point to the other. We are talking about the future of vaccines, but we all know that using sea, rail is still going to be slow, and aviation stays in the core. So we want to intensify the cooperation through outreach activities, because first, before you can get an orientation, you need to be able to know what the opportunities are. And this has been one of the biggest role of our activities across Africa on creating a platform for professionals to inspire through their own careers. In Europe, has it all. We see that the level of technology infrastructure development is very high. You go from the high trains, the sea transportation. You go with the airlines, the strategies around the European movement. We want the same in Africa, and intensifying the cooperation, sharing best practices, create multiplying platforms of brainstorming, of exchanges. A little idea we can have through technology today and share could be a go-ahead to improve the relationship for the benefit of the development of our continent. When I talk to youth generally about the opportunities and the careers around aviation and what it brings around, like tourism, hospitality, telling them that those are new niches that they can explore, they are very amazed, because the tendency is everyone wants to leave Africa to go to Europe. But we all know that Africa is the continent of the future. Everything has to be done here. So by reviewing and intensifying and sharing best practices, now COVID has made us understand that through technology, we can see without traveling. We can exchange. This platform, for example, if it was before, we would have thought about meeting in a country and exchange physically. But today, COVID has brought us a great sense of helping each and everyone to seize the opportunity to ensure that we grow faster. What has been done just needs to be replicated. And through education, which is the key entry to change the mindset of people and especially the young generations, is to enable multiple platforms where they can, on regular basis, during their spare time, through applications, see what is being done and understand that it can also be done in their own environment. So urban, rural mobility at all levels is vital, and we are very confident that by the end of COVID, we will see the great change. Today, everyone is into technology. Everyone is focusing on knowing what is happening around, and the realities are we definitely need to work hand in hand to ensure that we improve the connectivities in our regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you for that very powerful message and the reminder of the importance of digital connectivity, especially in today's day and age. It's really making a huge impact. I'll move on to Armin now. Armin, thank you for being with us this morning as well. I'd like to move, we've heard a lot about different impacts of connectivity and what it means for the world, for communities. Let's go a little bit more specifically into the positive externalities created by improving regional infrastructure. We're looking at emissions reduction, socioeconomic gains, et cetera. Over to you, Armin.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thanks to you for organizing this very exciting event. I think it's a very much neglected issue in most of the discussions at the moment, the issue of connectivity. However, I would like to start the discussion also a bit reflecting on what a colleague has said, with a bit more a general overview on how COVID-19 is, from our perspective, affecting transport. So I'm working here at GIZ. I'm focusing on transport issues for a couple of years now, and I'm also in charge of the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative too. I have put the link in the chat so you can follow up on this. So what we are observing at the moment in terms of transport sector development is, from my perspective, a real shift. A shift away from physical assets towards more digital solutions. I'm fully aware that the physical infrastructure gap, in particular in Africa, is very big, but at the same time, the current trends really offer an opportunity to shift more towards the digital solutions. So what we are observing is less on a physical level, but more on a meta level. So on the one hand side, during this crisis, we have seen a quite immediate knowledge-based emergency response. So this is tremendously new. So under the impression of this COVID crisis, governance, city governments had to really act very fast based on data on how this disease is spreading. And they have come up with very sound solutions in many places in order to tackle this crisis. We have seen so many good examples in Asia, in parts of Africa, in parts of Latin America. So this is really a global trend. And we have seen an intensification of knowledge generation. So we have never seen so much knowledge coming up so quickly about, on the one hand side, the COVID crisis itself, but also to how to respond in the transport sector. So all the freight forwarders, the freight companies have immediately reacted and put out new guidelines on how to make transport supply chains more safe, how to make it more resilient, how to make it or how to adapt it to the changing transport patterns. So this is really a shift in the speed how the transport sector is acting. And we have seen a tremendous amount of crowdsourced agile concept development and implementation. So there is a very close link now between the challenge, the immediate reaction, and the implementation. So there is no big detour via associations or universities, but cities, governments, companies in particular, logistics companies are really testing things. They are looking, how does it work? How can we implement it in the framework of the next 12 hours, 48 hours within the framework of the next week? So they are adapting very quickly to the changes because the pressure is so high. And we are observing a massive acceleration of knowledge sharing in the whole sector. And this is something that we should capitalize on for future action. And we observe a real use of real data generation and use. So there's so much information now, real-time information available at our fingertips now around this crisis, but also how the transport sector is responding. So this is really something that encourages me that we will come out of this crisis in the transport sector much stronger than before, despite all the challenges. And this leads me to the main question, the question about socio-economic benefits of higher connectivity, regional connectivity. And I'm sure this is not coming by default. I mean, on the one hand side, we have first order results of better connectivity, including reduced transport costs, new and better transport services, of course, and I'm referring here to a study of Grim, and increased reliability. The second order is increased trade, resulting from less transport costs, higher connectivity between markets, and then, of course, higher outputs, value-added services to new companies, and then this results in the third order, of course, in economic growth, in inclusion, in equity. But there are also downsides. With increased trade, with increased traffic flows, there is a high risk that it will result in more emissions, more CO2 emissions, more local emissions, which are a high burden also in many African cities. It may result in less equity because services tend to be concentrated in urban areas. So there is a risk of exclusion of rural areas. So the economic impact of better regional links outside the main corridors is far less than, of course, along the main links and in the urban areas. And as I said at the beginning, the positive effects of better connectivity don't come by default. So we need to take bolder decisions in the way how we are designing regional connectivity, also versus global connectivity. I mean, we have seen the over-reliance on one big partner in Asia can be a huge challenge. So we need to decide more intensively, are we focusing on regional connectivity versus global connectivity? How we are deciding about road versus rail connectivity. There are a lot of discussions now about the financial viability of rail infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa. On the other hand side, as a colleague has said, there's this issue of permanence. Once you have it, it's a huge asset and it's going to shape transport patterns in the region. We need to have a more intense discussion about the question of external finance-led investments or the domestic resource mobilization for transport infrastructure. Are we over-reliant on external debt, on external finances for the development of corridors? And we need to focus much harder on the question, are our regional connectivity efforts strengthening local business, or are they just opening up the markets for external supply? So I think this question here, which we are discussing today, has been around for a couple of years, of course, but COVID-19, with this huge acceleration of pressure and this amplification of issues in the market, really needs to make us rethink what we expect from all the discussions, what we expect from the investments in infrastructure, what do we expect from regional connectivity. And there's a huge opportunity to make it better, greener, to make it more efficient by focusing on the main topic. But there's also a risk to waste this opportunity and to end up in a situation where we are witnessing failing infrastructure, failing services because of defaults, because of all types of missed opportunities.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for raising now this huge opportunity that we have ahead of us, an opportunity not to miss. In order not to miss it, in your perspective, what do you think needs to happen in terms of Europe-Africa cooperation? How can we make sure that this relationship plays a role in contributing to the improvements and avoids any of the pitfalls that you've raised already?
Yeah, I think there's a huge potential in terms of collaboration in respect to the new agenda which the European Union under the leadership of Ms. von der Leyen has set out in terms of greening the continent, decarbonizing the content. So there's a big push forward towards new technologies, new types of digital solutions, all types of new propulsion technologies, electrification, use of hydrogen and so on. And I think all these fields offer a huge potential for collaboration, for mutual learning in terms of how we can digitalize services, how we can improve the efficiency of services. So I think this issue of joint learning, joint capacity development is a huge potential between the two continents, and the continents are increasingly intertwined, interlinked. So I think setting up more and even better kind of observatories, joint learning institutes, joint investment opportunities in the end will be the way forward for the collaboration between the two continents.
Thank you very much, Armin. We have now heard from all of our speakers, and now I'd like to hear from the rest of you, from the participants who've joined us today. I have 3 names up on my list that I'm going to go to already, but please, again, raise your virtual hand to come into the conversation. My colleagues will let me know that you are eager to come in. We'll take in questions, we'll take in your comments and reflections, because I know that we have as well many experts in the audience. I'd like to start with Suvi, who has posted a question in the chat. Suvi, would you unmute your microphone and come in and introduce yourself? Suvi, you may need to unmute. Okay, well, we will wait for Suvi to come in. Gunilla, who is a member of our high-level group. Gunilla, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for exciting presentations. And I was more thinking, and it's really not a question, but when Fadi spoke about how things are changing so rapidly and the need to collaborate between urban and rural. And I do hope, and we really heard that through the presentations, that there is a huge opportunity for joint collaboration and learning from European and African side together. Because one of those areas is really, I think, urban planning and how to live healthy lives in cities. To learn from mistakes done, perhaps in parts of Europe, but now with the restart of economies that needs to take place in both sides, how to build back better. And there, I think really that Europe can learn a lot from Africa if we just listen a little bit about the trends, how young people would like to connect with all the different technologies, but equally also to understand the level of innovation and new smart way of thinking. And that will need that we not only discuss what we're going to do together, but also how we're going to do it. And that, I think, is a little bit tricky, because everyone seems to know exactly what good could look like, and that means everything and invest in everything, because we need all of it. But to be more strategic and really also to build in this, what was said around aviation and maritime transports, how it really can connect the continents as well. And that, I think, is really when we now restart, rethink, and going into another, can we live together in good urban settings with healthy lives, with a good surrounding areas, with the connectivity to the rural parts, and uniting the continents with good connectivity and infrastructure. That will be the trick, and I hope we can discuss more how to do that, and really making sure that it's a joint planning and joint thinking with a shared vision. The time for that is really now. So I think it's such a timely topic you've chosen as well, and I've learned a lot. So I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you so much, Gunilla. Thank you for being part of the conversation and for sharing your reflections. I'd like to come now to Tanya, who is a member of our Africa-Europe Transport and Connectivity Strategy Group, which will be meeting for the first time this afternoon. Tanya, please come in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Tanya Songini. I'm on the board of a number of energy companies in the UK, energy and infrastructure companies, and one of them is the Private Infrastructure Development Group that does early stage development and financing of projects in some of the most difficult countries in Africa and Asia. And an area we have been looking at the Private Infrastructure Group over the last several years has been how we can also promote marine transport on some of the larger lakes in Africa. We've spoken today about aviation, about the need to improve road transport, about rail, particularly in an urban setting. But I wanted to ask the panelists, what about the role of marine transport? If we look at Lake Victoria, for example, some of the cities along this lake are connected by unpaved roads that become literally impassable for a share of the year during the rainy season. So why not also focus on marine transport, which would avoid those periods of the year where the roads, where transport is impassable, as also a technology that maybe not so much in the short term, but certainly in the mid and the long term, is a green alternative. I mean, we see examples today in countries like the UK and Norway of ferries powered by biogas or hydrogen. So I just wanted to ask the question. I've heard very little about marine transport on the lakes, whether this is not also an important part of the equation to strengthen mid-sized towns, to have them become connectivity nodes, but at the same time, again, I come back to the Lake Victoria example, foster more interconnection between bordering countries.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming in. I know that the question of inland waterways their role in transport and connectivity is something that I've also heard coming up in different fora recently, and I would also be really interested to hear from the speakers about this. Also its role in potentially lowering freight costs, more generally speaking. So it will be great to hear from some of the speakers about this. I'd like to now invite in Mervyn, who is also a member of our strategy group. Mervyn, please introduce yourself and come in.
Yeah, hi, good day everyone. My name is Mervyn Chetty, and I'm the general manager responsible for Africa in Transnet. It's a large trade and logistics. Perhaps maybe just to respond to Tanya's question around the maritime, a couple of things I think before I get to that point. 67% of Africa's projects are actually not at the bankable stage. So they're quite high in nature. And I think that's probably because not of the lack of capital, but more especially around the lack of skills to get some of these projects to bankability. And a significant portion of these projects are actually transport related, whether they road, rail, and ports. But coming back to Tanya's point around maritime, I think what we've seen happening in the sort of last 2-3 years is certainly the vessel sizes are actually getting larger on the north-south corridor as opposed to on the east-west corridor. So a lot of the traffic that's actually currently on the east-west corridor, that it means from Asia going into Europe and passing through the Suez Canal, some of those vessels are being cascaded down into the north-south corridor. So it's actually putting a lot more pressure onto the African coastline to actually get a lot more deeper drafts and so on. So, and that in itself is putting a lot more pressure on the landside activities. And I think we talk a lot about regional integration, but I think the crust of the issue here is that we need to have the policy environment in a very stable manner for countries or for investors to actually have some sort of certainty around investing in ports, rail, and pipeline. A good example is the north-south corridor between Zambia, DRC, Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And southbound cargo is pretty much copper concentrate, and going up north is predominantly a lot of luxury goods, containers and so on. But there's a reluctance for shipping lines to actually have these containers going up north because they fear that it may not come back. So I think, and also the speed restrictions on rail lines, etc. So there's a lot of emphasis around infrastructure, but I think there's a soft piece to it as well, which is skills and the policy environment. So that's a very short synopsis around what we picked up in the recent times. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks so much, Mervyn. Suvi, I hear you're back in and you can come in with your question now. If you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So my name is Suvi Parhankangas, and I'm a Finnish person working here in Brussels in our permanent representation. My question was about the potential for green aviation. I don't think many people know necessarily that much about Finland, but we are also a country of vast distances, obviously not in the scale of the entire continent of Africa, but our transportation heavily relies on, especially cargo transportation, heavily relies on trucks and road transportations. There is very much potential for cooperation between Europe and Africa, and I would like to know how viable are green aviation solutions in Africa. For example, are fuel-based planes more reliable than greener solutions, or does, for example, the connectivity affect fuel transport reliability?
Thank you so much, Suvi. I'm glad you were able to come back into the conversation. Aisha, I have you up next. Please just introduce yourself and unmute your microphone. Aisha, can you? Oh, there you are. Hi there.
Oh, sorry. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, my name is Aisha Lumaru. I'm working with the EGNOS in Africa Joint Program Office, which is a program which is issued from the partnership between Europe and Africa, intended to develop the use of satellite navigation in civil aviation, but also for other application in maritime, road, rail, agriculture. So we are based in Dakar. And I wanted to make just a comment, in fact, on the importance of aviation, in fact, for Africa, following the intervention of Akadimetu. It's important to mention that the position on aviation, the position at the African Union is that aviation can be a driver for the implementation of the continental objective in the Agenda 260. Sorry, I'm starting to have a good level in English, but I'm a French speaker, so
no problem.
Because the argument is, well, in an environment where you have nothing, okay, where you have to go from zero, they have talking about the rural, okay, you have to consider the economic, of course, parameters. But if you want to go from nothing and to provide some, I will say, some transport facilities to the population, one solution is you just need an airport, and you need few infrastructure. I have shared with you some application of the space-based solution EGNOS, which you can use to provide air navigation solution at continental and regional areas, which are being developed by ASECNA. So in fact, there are some solution and possibilities. And now the main question is, as Fadima to say, that the sector has been greatly impacted by the COVID. So you have this issue to address. So how to help the sector come out from the crisis, but also how to help the sector, address the needs in developing skills and so on. But I think the partnerships should focus also to support such initiative using the new technologies, such the technology I've talked about, SBAS, and especially considering that it has application with other mode of transport, so it can help develop solutions that can be interconnected, can be environmental friendly, because one of the main argument is that when you use aviation and you propose a solution, airlines will reduce the environmental impact because they will have a better operational efficiency in the choice of the trajectory, which will reduce the emission of COD. So wow. This is the comment I wanted to make, in fact, in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming in. I'm generally collecting questions before I go back to speakers, but I know Fadi wanted to come in with a remark real quick, so I'll invite her in before we continue on with the participants. Fadi?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to make some comments, brief comments on what Gunilla said. We definitely need more cooperation. And I want to emphasize on the fact that Friends of Europe is doing a great job, because in our introduction, John brought up the importance of education. And education is not just going into understanding, getting the certificate, but it's also making people visualize what is possible of doing in our own environment. And talking about Tanya, who spoke about the marine transportation, we have, with COVID, all these questions have come up, and the reduction of traffic in our urban cities or connection between the rural areas and the urban areas rely also on the water. But unfortunately, these are sectors that are not very common. These are sectors where people don't still see it as opportunities to create jobs, to get more youth out of being jobless and innovating. And that's why I stress that talking about mobility, transportation globally should be a keen and close cooperation between Europe and Africa, so that all what you have existing, don't minimize the little impact it can have, multiplying outreaches, using applications just to raise the awareness on all what constitutes the transportation facilitation from rural urban areas within countries will be very key. Because before, everyone was thinking of quitting their countries to other countries because they believe everything was good. COVID has brought us to a new norm where we stay within the country. And so we have to accelerate the process of changing the mindset of people and also investors, because we have these opportunities, we have these possibilities, but we need the educational system. If we want to go into maritime, it's a whole new sector. Can we have the possibility of using our wood locally to make new boats? Can we introduce the ferry transportation because it's not part of us? Can we bring in the people of understanding the importance of using ferries to go from one city to the other? So these are the new norms that we actually need to put in place and raise more awareness, and Africa would definitely benefit from Europe. And lastly, Sylvie was talking about sorry, Sylvie, you were mentioning about Africa being ready for the green transportation. Of course, when we look at our initiatives before the COVID, some of our airports have gone green. So we also have this concern about protecting the environment. And as I still say, I would still stress on that. We have to bring in close collaboration to learn on all the best practices. So that was just the comment I was going to add to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Fadi. I'm going to move on to a few more participant comments. Julius, please. Just unmute your microphone and introduce yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the contributors to the discussion. It has been very educative. My issue about the connectivity, I will talk briefly about Uganda. A colleague from Uganda, from ABS, has already talked about the road infrastructure and all that. Though it doesn't capture the whole picture, of course, there's been a lot of infrastructure development in terms of roads in Uganda, but of course, the connectivity issue still remains. On the issue of rail, of course, while other people are talking from urban rural connections, we are looking at it in form of a transformative infrastructure. What do I mean by transformative? Because as you know, the cost of doing business, for example, Uganda being a landlocked country, we have a lot of costs from cargo costs, getting cargo from Mombasa or Dar es Salaam. So we are looking at it not just for convenience, but as very transformative in terms of cost of doing business. So rail infrastructure is definitely very important at Uganda's case. On marine infrastructure, I'm glad that Madame Songini from Wagner, yes, actually, so we invite you. There is already a regional infrastructure project on Lake Victoria, but of course there has been some financing issues. So you are welcome to come and join us and develop that water transport. You are very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. That's my contribution right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in. I'd like to come now to Jan. Jan, if you unmute your microphone and let us know who you are.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. Very happy to join here from Geneva, from UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. I was very happy to hear some words from Tanya, Fadima, and others on maritime, and wanted to compliment that, well, 80% of trade volume, if we now move to cargo of passengers, 80% of trade volume is maritime. But this is also linked very much to land connectivity. Let me explain why. In Europe, the most important port for German cargo is Rotterdam in the Netherlands. The most important port for French cargo is Antwerp in Belgium. Most important port for Polish cargo is Hamburg in Germany. Most important port for Norwegian cargo is actually Gothenburg in Sweden. In Africa, we do not see this, mostly because of missing hinterland connectivity, not enough trade and transit facilitation. There was a quite good study done by the World Bank, in which we also contributed, that showed how there has been a lot of positive improvement, investment, private sector modernization, decentralization in African ports. It was mostly in Western Africa, but the story is very similar in other regions. But that the benefits were not always passed on, or the improvements were not always passed on to the user, to the importer-exporter, because there's not enough competition among the ports. If you are in Benin, you import-export through Cotonou, because the options to go through neighboring countries are not there yet. So in the context of the African free trade area, continental free trade area, I see a lot of potential. As we improve the internal connectivity, we will also improve the competitiveness of African trade, overseas trade, which is largely maritime, because we will have improved competition and choices on the seaports. I sent a couple of links in the chat. Happy to engage further on this, I think, also quite important topic on the cargo connectivity.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for coming in with this. And thank you, of course, for sharing the information in the chat as well. You're all, of course, welcome to do that. Share studies, share links, share information. I'd like to bring James into the conversation now. James, if you introduce yourself and unmute. And maybe you need to turn your video on as well. James? James, if you are not coming in, I'm going to move on to Pascaline. James, we can come back to you in a moment if you get your internet or your video and audio working. Pascaline, please.
Thank you very much. I find I'm Pascaline Gabory from Pilot for Dev. I find a very interesting point of this debate to link connectivity and education, not only digital, but also to facilitate a safe transportation access to schools and universities for young people located in remote areas. So thanks a lot to all the speakers. Concerning the transportation connectivity, what we see in some projects is that the financing of transport infrastructure like rail, maritime is often the key for the public expenditure. So I know there are like the international organizations are working on that, like the African Development Banks and so on, but we see that it's not done yet. And finally, I had a question, which was how the travel restrictions linked to the COVID have impacted the long-term air connectivity, especially between Europe and Africa. And does this crisis also have an impact on the transport access for remote areas? I mean, is it increasing the gap between central connected areas and more rural remote areas? Thank you.
Thank you, Pascaline. I'm just going to let you all know that we have about 10 minutes left for the participant portion. So anyone else who wants to come in, please do put your virtual hand up ASAP so we can make sure you have an opportunity to raise your comments. Next, I have Desmond coming in. Desmond, if you introduce yourself and unmute. Desmond, you don't seem to be coming through. Okay, I'm going to move on to Judith, and we'll come back to Desmond as well if he comes back on. Judith, please unmute and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Judith.
Yes, so I'd just like to make a few comments. I just posted them on the chat box. My name is Judith Oginga Martins, a researcher and mobility expert working with UN Habitat. So I just want to agree with the comments that we do need to have a transdisciplinary approach and include issues of urban planning and looking at maritime transport as well. Since Africa is at a pivotal point and does not have the luxury to develop just parts of its modes as compared to others, so they all do need to move at the same time. We have to look at mobility as a system, and we cannot, for example, develop maritime transport over road transport or road transport over aviation, for example. So all these sectors have to be considered together, and that is what is important for us. Then we also need to look at the fact that intensive cooperation with Europe has to be encompassed with a lot of sensitivity to history, to context, to transparency, and also to goodwill. It will be important to use technical know-how, and by technical know-how, we are looking at the best of the local capacity. And let us not forget also the diaspora, the African diaspora living in Europe. That is going to be a very key component of developing the transport capacity on the continent. So these are just some of the few comments that I had. And of course, there was a question that you also added in the email that you sent to all of us on gender equality and vulnerable groups. Very important to discuss in this. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Judith. Thanks for coming in. I see that Desmond is in fact back with us. Desmond, if you unmute and introduce yourself.
Okay, so I just had a comment and a question on the issue of just transitions.
Could you just introduce yourself before you start?
Yeah,
Thank you.
My name is Desmond, and I'm from Kenya, but I'm a student here at KU Leuven in Belgium. So the question I had that I wanted the speakers to comment on is the problem of just transitions. Yes, we need connectivity, and we need these mega projects in terms of transport infrastructure. But in an example in Kenya is we have a rail network from Mombasa to Nairobi, and then government tried to enforce truckers to use this rail, but they refused. So they cited reasons that the project is costly, the service is costly, and also if they use the rail, they are going to lose a lot of jobs by the drivers and other people related through the chain. So I wanted the speakers to comment a little about how we can ensure that this development in terms of infrastructure is just to everyone.
Thank you, Desmond.
Thank you.
Thank you for this important question. Kingsley, please unmute and introduce yourself. Kingsley seems to be on the move. Kingsley, are you hearing us? Okay, we'll put Kingsley on hold for a second until he unmutes and lets us know. I'll move on to Lynn. Lynn, if you unmute and introduce yourself. Lynn Zhou? I think, oh, here we are. Hi, Lynn.
Nice to see you, and I'm very happy to having me here. So, I've heard a lot of questions and problems here to, I mean, in Africa. So, is a better way to solve the problem of transportation, like a marine. I mean, give us more data to learn about data.
More data. Okay,
yeah.
Got it. Thank you very much, Lynn. Baruti, come on in. Baruti, you'll just need to unmute for me. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself. Oh, there you are. Oh, Baruti, I think we're having a bit of a problem with your microphone. We can't hear you, even though you are, in fact, unmuted. Perhaps if you unplug the microphone and use the microphone in your computer? No, I'm sorry. The sound's just not coming through. Baruti, if you would like to maybe either if you can get it unplugged and contribute, or if you could just put your comments in the chat, then maybe everybody could hear what you have to say. I'm so sorry. Technical issues. I think at this stage, I'll move us back to the speakers. Speakers, you have heard a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of concerns. We were talking about urban planning and healthy lives. Definitely the need to listen more, especially to the youth. Maritime transport has been a big point of conversation, green aviation, education, schools, the impact of the travel restrictions in the long term on air transport connectivity, et cetera, and so forth. I am going to start back with John, and please respond to what you've heard. John.
Thank you, Trisca. I think most of the comments I had were complementary to what I had said. I didn't hear any specific questions, but I will just take note of a number of things that have been said. One, I want to thank Fed because she really emphasized the issue of education and how we should consider it, because we look at education not only as schooling or training, but really the totality of life and how we are able to build ourselves in it. And on the other hand, I was listening to a number of contributors there, and I'm thinking about the issue of state capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that we need to broaden this financing and state capacity. We need to broaden it so that it can be inclusive. A number of the infrastructure development that we do, or the connectivity initiatives that we carry, tend to leave out some people, tend to leave out the weak, tend to leave out the poor, tend to leave out the women. Sometimes they are grand and good initiatives. My brother Julius in Brussels, the Brussels embassy, indeed mentioned it, that we have a number of projects that have come in and they have been very useful. What we are now trying to look at is how do we have this inclusiveness of the youth, inclusiveness of the women, inclusiveness of the poor. And I have two examples of programs that we did in AFSI that we realized that this inclusiveness is a resource, is something that can be harnessed, is something that is also positive, something that adds to enhance what is being put there. One of them was a project we did in infrastructure development for the rural feeder roads. And we realized that at one point, we had a feeder road that could not connect to the next village because our donor had said that's where we should be able to stop. But the rural communities told us, well, we can give you the materials, we can give you the labor, we can do whatever it means if you connect this road because it will help us to reach the health centers. And we did that. And 90% of that contribution was a voluntary contribution that came from the rural communities. Then we have also an example of what we call the border riders that help to reach some of the areas that have very poor infrastructure. The vehicles can't go there, but the border, commonly called border here, is a motorcycle. They are able to modify their motorcycles and move the expectant mothers from one place to access the health services. For me, these are examples of saying that if we design some of these infrastructure programs, some of these connectivity initiatives, while paying attention to the end users, while paying attention to the individuals that are going to benefit from them, we have a greater impact and we have a greater inclusiveness. And therefore, this can be able to help in ensuring that these initiatives, grand as they are, go a long way in assisting the rural people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for those final thoughts. Tommaso, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation now for your reflections.
Thank you very much. I think all comments were indeed very insightful, very interesting. The first comment, which was made about the fact that Europe can learn a lot from, that Africa can learn a lot from Europe, also from the mistakes that Europe has made when it comes to urban development and transport. That's absolutely true. I live in Brussels. Brussels is like a real showcase of everything which was done wrong when it comes to urban development and also mobility. So Europe made a lot of mistakes, and Africa can definitely learn from that. Also, Africa has these further challenges of exponential urbanization as a restless young population which is striving for improving its life conditions. So I think definitely like these experiences could really learn a lot from the other. One specific question on the just transition, which was made by Desmond. I think that was very interesting and important because rail was brought into the table. And I think this specific point of the just transition is really something that we can see in a number of areas. When we talking about like greening the economy in general, like the issue of just transition also remains extremely important. I think the word transition already gives the idea of what should be done, and just transition even more. It's really about, it's not really about putting, like risking to somehow putting people in difficult employment conditions. It's really the challenge and the opportunity is really to redesign the economy progressively with a stepwise approach, making sure that everyone is finally involved in this economic transition, in this new economic pathway. And again, it's not really about replacing one model with the other one, but it's really just going with a stepwise approach from one model to the other, trying really to include everyone in this. Is a challenge, but is also an opportunity because ideally the pathway we're moving to is actually a better one from the sustainability point of view, for instance. And there was one keyword about data. I conclude with that. I think whenever we talk about data, that's very important. I think indeed it's not about only about infrastructure and it's not only about sustainability, but I think everything should be, as much as we can, be accompanied by a data economy which supports that. And when it comes to rail transport in Europe, rail had to catch up very quickly with other modes of transport. I think the development of infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure really goes hand in hand with also the establishment of a data economy with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tommaso. Armin, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a very rich discussion. I would just briefly only touch on the issue of just transition. I think it's a very important issue, and as Tommaso has said, this is coming up in many places, and not just in the transport sector, but also in energy, if you look at the coal industry, if you look at the car industry, and so on. The main question in this respect is, and I do not want to belittle this issue, the main question in this regard is the question, how wide are we going to cast the net? I mean, there are problems, obvious problems with the trucking industry, not only in Kenya, but with many other places. There are so many trucks on the road that there's huge congestion in many places. So a railway line, a freight railway line, can actually relieve transport, make it more efficient, make it cheaper, help to improve efficiency and quality. So the question is, can we use some of the benefits of this rail infrastructure to mitigate the economic impact of the trucking industry and so on? And can we help actually to ensure a kind of further employment? But we should not hold ourselves back just by all this concern about just transitions, which are from an individual perspective very important and very relevant. And as I said, we should not belittle it. But from an economy-wide perspective, I think we should pursue a wider picture on what is the most efficient and most cost-efficient means of transport, helping us to relieve congestion, helping us to get people and goods from A to B faster and more safe and in a more ecological way. So this is, of course, a discussion which needs to be held in many places in respect to the individual topic, but this should not stop us from transforming mobility towards a more sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Armin. Fadi, please.
Yes. Thank you very much. I wanted to stress that at the beginning we spoke about gender equality, and one most important thing is women-based business in transportation of facilitation of mobility in Africa is more or less inexistent. We have some few women who have privately owned companies engaged in transportation. And my big request is we need to intensify the possibilities of also supporting the private sector, because the strategies and policies that have been put in place for the past years has been organizations in Europe using unique channels of talking to governments. Now, the tendency is if you do the same practice and you have no result, you need to diversify because you have some passionate individuals or group of people who have a concern about a particular or specific region on facilitating the mobility that will be happy to reach out to learn from the practices. Taking aviation, for example, I have had the opportunity to fly to Europe and in many of the African countries. And the tendency is people think of Africa as being one country. No, Africa is 5 distinct regions that has its particularities and few similarities. And the rate of development from one region to the other differs. If you take the Southern African countries, mobility development is so huge. When you talk about Victoria Lake, I come from Cameroon in Central Africa. We have 6 countries in our region, and we serve Cameroon 2 inland countries. Yet, if you look at the statistics, aviation is not developed, railway is not developed, when 2 of the major countries, Chad and Central African Republic, depend on Cameroon's seaport to be able to get their goods. Now, my question is, what can Europe do to support private individuals who have the will to invest in these sectors, but due to the financial cost, abandon the projects, as well as water? If you look around our region, Central Africa, because I consider it as one of the richest regions that lacks a huge involvement of both government and private sector investment in the facilitation of mobility, we don't have any rail linking the countries. Now, if you look at the government strategies, you find out that the business people concerned about the intra-regional or intercontinental exchanges of goods and people also will want to explore that. But is Europe today ready to get the private sector involved in partnering or even redistributing part of their sharehold of their potential with Africans? Because in Europe, I found out that most of the airports are privately owned. It's not common to find our airports privately owned. And we believe that by doing privatization or doing concession or making talks engagement between these other options that enable the European community to have better flexibility in their movements could be a way of intensifying and sharing the best practices for the business people who only think of importing, when we can also develop the industries in our own region to transform what we have and export, share these best practices. So I want to have the positive belief that through your platform, we will be able to impact on the policies and the vision on how people should see the Europe-African cooperation, and also focus on collaborating with individuals that have a strong drive, a group of people that have a strong drive, and not only focus on the government. Because as I usually say, governments in Africa change like the direction of the wind. So by the time you have a project and you have progress and you even have the funding, there is a government change and the process has to restart. And there comes the importance of education. As I said, you don't only educate the kids, you also need to educate the general public on understanding the importance, the role, and the capital involvement of mobility in the development of all areas. So that is my contribution, because with regards to aviation, tourism, I try as much as possible each time to help people understand the need of changing the mindset, because it starts from the mindset. When people don't have a broader view of understanding, they only focus on financing. But by the time they get the finance, the project doesn't go on because a new person comes in and needs to be re-educated. So we need to find strategies to have standards that will facilitate this communication for the survival of mobility, all sectors of transportation, to make the example of Europe be understood in all the different regions of Africa with respect to their specific needs. Because Northern Africa is much more developed, Southern Africa is much more developed, Eastern Africa is much more developed. Some of the English-speaking West African countries are. And if I go detailedly to say the 17 sub-Saharan French-speaking Africa, if you go on the map, strategically are left out. Is it language barrier? I don't think so. So we need to review it globally to ensure that the African projects carried out by the African Union impacts Africa globally. And this could be accelerated through platforms like yours, through reviewing, redesigning policies, and changing the norms, getting more people involved. And I believe that we will have the success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fadi, also for this really powerful message. I think we're in complete agreement as well that anything we need to do can't just involve the government. It has to involve the private sector. It has to involve civil society. Has to involve academics and journalists and so on and so forth. So we have to make sure we're taking this cross-sectoral approach. Before we wrap up for the day, I know we have at least 2 members of our strategy group with us. They've both come into the conversation. I just wanted to know, the first meeting is going to take place this afternoon. From this conversation that we've had today, Tanya, Mervyn, what kind of messages do you think you want to take into the strategy group's work going forward? Could I invite one of you to come in? Tanya, please.
Well, I found Fadu's comments now summarize very well what we've been discussing today, so much appreciated. We need to distinguish between the different regions of Africa and what their needs are. And I think part of that, as has been said by others on the panel today, is the complementarity of different forms of transport, rail, aviation, road, but also marine, as I said. And I'm looking forward to that discussion in the strategy group to see how we best go down that route and find the right balance in looking for the right solutions for the different countries and regions of Africa.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thanks for that. Mervyn, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think Tanya's covered part of it, and from my perspective, I think perhaps there's 3 things. One is what's come out quite clearly is that the certainty in the policy environment, and yes, governments do change on a 5-year basis, and every other year we're getting new leadership coming in. But I think the policies are something that has to be driven from a certainty point of view. I think the second point about funding, yes, funding is important, but I think you're only going to get private sector to come in to assist, if there's certainty in the policy environment. I like the comment, last speaker, talking about getting all the different actors in place. Certainly, it involves training, development, and education, and it's something that maybe we have to focus on. I don't think so. In the last couple of years, we've actually focused a lot on that. People focused a lot more on hardcore infrastructure, but we left the soft elements out, and I think that's something maybe we should bring into the inception meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all really very much for being with us here today. I think this has been an incredibly dynamic and interactive conversation. It's really been wonderful to hear from each and every one of you. I think one of the big outcomes of the conversation today is going to be about education. We need education. It's going to play a huge role in everything. I mean, let's be honest. But here especially, it's something we're going to need to look very deeply into. Please do keep an eye on our website. This conversation will continue. Not this specific conversation, not right away, but next week we'll continue our Africa-Europe Days with some additional activities. Feel free to follow along on our website and to see how you can get involved. And please also follow our Africa-Europe Foundation to see how you can get involved in the weeks and months ahead. We just launched it on Wednesday, as some of you know, so there is going to be a lot of opportunity to be involved. So thank you all very, very much for being with us here today, and I wish you all a nice day. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.